Hey everybody, welcome to week 7 of English 1133. We're almost there, we're on the home stretch, and I'm going to talk today about my favorite topic in the entire syllabus, that is editing and proofreading. I literally do this for a living. I've been editing for about 15 years, mostly focusing on nonfiction, particularly academic and business nonfiction. We're going to try to keep this lecture to about 6 hours to just give you the basics of what I do and why it's important. No, I'm not even going to try that. I have to sleep at some point. I do want to do a little bit of show and tell, though, before I get into our notes, just to give you a sense of the purpose of some of the work that I do and that I'll be talking about in today's lecture. So I have books, of course. This is the first editing project I ever did for sort of money. I don't think I actually got paid for it, but I got a free book out of it, which at the time was a really big deal. This is a textbook for high-level professional checkers players, and the author's a friend of mine. I got a nice little note from him there, got an autographed copy, and I would make a lot of editorial choices differently now, but it was sort of my first chance to really dig into a project and see what sort of positive difference I could make there. More recently, this is a travel memoir that I edited a couple of years ago. This is about baseball. The author went to all 30 Major League Baseball parks in one season, back when you could actually, leave your house and to go to baseball parks. And he hired me to kind of clean up the narratives, make sure everything flowed a little bit better, because he basically set up as a travel diary. And there were a lot of really, really similar entries and ideas and descriptions. I defined some ways to make them both clear and kind of more readable. This was a big project. This actually sold really well. And it's another memoir, but it's a much broader base. The author, I've worked with him on several projects now, and he is a CEO of a high-end audio company. And so he wanted to tell his life story, particularly in terms of how his business failed miserably several times before it finally achieved a little bit of success, and sort of what he learned from that. It's a pretty raw story at times, but it was the first memoir really that I had worked on a serious level, and I really kind of enjoyed it. I've tried one or two fiction editing projects. They were not a good fit for me at all. But I found that working with narratives and kind of being able to tell those stories is something that I enjoy doing. The last book I want to show you is Reference. This is the Chicago Manual of Style, and it is a big, big, thick book. I have not finished reading it, but it is one that most professional editors have on the shelf, because Chicago style is not just used to torture poor undergrads who are just trying to do ministry degrees. It is also used to organize and to make certain stylistic decisions for probably the majority of books that you read, and certainly the majority of work in academic circles. Even in disciplines that use another citation style, like APA or MLA, Chicago is sort of the default to organize that. So it's a matter of sort of ongoing professional development in learning how that works and being able to integrate that into my work. As I mentioned, I've been editing for about 15 years. I still have a lot to learn about some parts of the business and parts of the craft, but I have found ways to combine my training in studying writing and teaching writing with sort of a sense for how to improve documents. If we were doing these classes live, then we'd probably do a little more hands-on work in practicing that. Not really an option over Zoom, but I do want to show you some techniques and kind of talk you through the skills and the processes involved for both editing and proofreading. And we will finish up, I'll give you a brief proofreading test that you can do to apply to your own work. Had a chance, obviously, to read your papers in the past 7 weeks, and there's always room for improvement for editing and proofreading, as long as you know where in the process it should go. So that's where I want to focus today. I'm going to switch over to my lecture notes and show you my absolute favorite meme of all time. The cat looking at you saying, if you don't like my changes, I can always edit your face. Because cats kind of think that way anyway. So we're going to focus more on the proofreading end than the editing end in terms of the practical skills. But I also want to connect that to some of the work that we've done in previous classes. Since you all have many more papers to write in your college careers, starting, of course, in English 1233, I think it's helpful to get the basics of these practices done now, so that you know sort of what to expect and what you can realistically accomplish at that stage of the writing process. So, a few housekeeping things to get us started. I did finish grading paper 2, no more discourse communities, yay. And I graded the week 6 homework that was in. I think maybe a couple of stragglers that came in late. Please go ahead and check your grade book on MyFire and let me know if anything is missing or inaccurate there. If you have a concern about your grades, then you'll definitely want to talk to me. We are past the drop day for the course, but I can give you a better sense of what you can expect. MyFire actually has a nice little tool that will predict possible grades, assuming you get 100% on everything. So I can tell you where you could potentially end up, and then we can talk about the best ways to maximize that score. One of the things you're doing this week, one option you have is the extra credit assignments, and that is to set up Zotero. There are videos linked on MyFire to walk you through that. It takes a little bit of fine-tuning to get it actually working. If you are local, might help to work with a classmate just to try to see if you can get those both done. One of the questions on the final exam will ask you to generate a citation for an article you'll be reading. It's a short article, and you're welcome to use Zotero to save yourself some time on that. And of course, for paper 3, you'll need to generate citations both in text and bibliographic for those 2 sources. So this is a useful tool to get the extra credit. Just send me a screenshot or a photo of Zotero running on your computer, and I will go ahead and give you those points. Course evaluations are also coming up. In fact, you have to complete the evaluation or at least pull it up to access the week 8 content, including the final exam. So please make some time this week to do that. As with all course evaluations, they stay anonymous and they stay confidential until after finals, and even then they're still anonymous. Don't put your name on it. I do prefer to have detailed comments because that gives me and everyone else involved in education here a much better sense of where we can improve. And that might be in terms of how the content is designed, what sort of assignments you get. It might be in terms of how is it delivered. Could there be improvements to MyFire? There are things that you wish we had covered that we didn't really do well, or there are just ways that you would improve the course. So you'll do that in the main course evaluation, and to a smaller extent, there's also this response to feedback assignment in week 8, and that will also include sort of a mini self-evaluation. So that's just coming up in a week and a half. You can get MyFire for the details on that. Speaking of next week, we don't really have much lecture content. By the time we get there, we'll be revising paper 3. So I'll be grading those drafts as they come in. It's Tuesday night, so I'm sure most of you are working on them right now. Since that's all you're doing, and taking the final, I'm not going to do a lecture video, but I will have extended office hours from 10 to 2 Eastern. So SU Ohio, that's your entire class time. I still recommend actually meeting as a class and working together because you can get a lot done in terms of informal peer reviews and helping each other out with studying for the final exam and stuff like that. And I will be available on Zoom to answer any questions you might have there. Likewise, those of you taking the online section, this might be a good chance if the regular office hours don't really work for you. As we approach the final, please reach out if you have questions or if you want to schedule an appointment to sit down and talk. I can tell you I'm typically less available on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I have another class to teach then, but we can figure out a time to work for both of us and go from there. Well then, let's launch into editing. I want to start out by distinguishing among some related concepts because editing often gets lumped together with revision and with proofreading to the point that some people, even when they are looking to hire an editor like me, will assume that either all I do is proofread, just find grammar mistakes, excuse me, or that if they give me the roughest of rough drafts, I will suddenly make it perfect. And neither one of those is really accurate. We've talked some about revision in a previous lecture. And to revisit that a little bit, I like this quote by Dennis Jertz. If your second draft is a cleaner, less shoddy version of the same thing, it's not a revision. In fact, we could say that when he's talking about that second cleaner draft, that's probably an edited or a proofread draft. But it doesn't really revise the ideas or the content. So as I have mentioned before, revision is about the whole paper. It includes technical content, ideas, structure, includes how do you develop your argument. It probably will adjust your thesis and make that a little stronger. It hopefully will meet all of the assignment requirements that you have for a given paper. So there's a lot going on here. Editing and proofreading come after that. So these are designed to improve specific parts of your paper. On the mechanical side, that might be the grammar, the punctuation, consistency, some formatting. It might be, let's get all these citations in APA format. But it's also about, let's make this sentence clearer. Let's make this paragraph flow a little better. Let's make this argument kind of hold together. Find where there could be holes in the logic, or find where there's a part that could confuse readers. So when I edit, I go through all of that stuff, and I'll talk through that process a little bit later. When I do give you feedback, especially on a rough draft setting, so as you turn in paper 3, this is the kind of feedback you'll be getting. I generally leave comments to suggest revision tasks, like, can you say more about this? Or what about this source? Or, I don't generally write that one out. But I also make corrections. The corrections is generally what I focus on for editing and proofreading. What I tell my clients, especially in the academic settings, is I approach your document as an educated non-specialist. I know a lot about writing, I know a lot about editing, but if your paper is on electrical engineering, I know very little about that. And so I will be able to offer feedback in terms of, does this make sense? And there may be parts that would make perfect sense to a specialist, but just don't make sense to me because I'm not an engineer. And that's one of these trade-offs you do in working with an outside editor. So those two stages of the writing process, they do very different things, but they generally come fairly late, especially if you write your rough draft the night it's due, which I'm sure none of you would ever attempt. It's easy to overlook editing and proofreading, or just to think I can hit spell check or run it through Grammarly or get my friend who's an English major or something to do this, and then I'm all done. But there's actually a lot more to it. So proofreading is mechanical. It is on the sentence level. And Ideally, it should be done after editing and when the content is pretty much set. Now, realistically, a lot of the stuff that I get um, that where they say we just need this proofread, they need actually more attention to the content. Sometimes they need full revisions. I can suggest those. A lot of times they need fuller editing. So what I do, and I actually have this verbiage on my website, um, editing can include proofreading. I think I'll call it that from now on. But it's a bigger process. So as I edit something, I think, what is the audience going to expect to see here? What is it about this genre or this setting or this context or even this content that's going to affect what they do? And we've talked about this in terms of rhetoric in previous weeks. How is the tone of the word choice affecting this? Is this the right word for the concept that you're trying to communicate? Since I work with a lot of international scholars, sometimes it's not, well, the vocab is not quite there. But also, could this be something that maybe doesn't work so well? As an editor, I am acting partly on the reader's behalf. I'm kind of a liaison between the author and the reader. And so I have to advocate for not just what the author wants to say, but how is it likely to be received by the readers that they're targeting. And so I have to keep a whole bunch of things in my head as I'm going through a given paper, and sometimes they're in a lot better shape, and sometimes they a lot more work. On a few occasions, I've had to send papers back and say, this is just not ready for editing yet. It doesn't have these components that it needs to kind of be at the minimum level there. And I've already written one dissertation. I don't want to rewrite yours. Whichever process you focus on, generally, of course, editing comes before proofreading. You want to make sure that your writing is correct, consistent, and clear. So if you want a checklist, there it is. Now, since we don't have really the setup to demonstrate editing in a useful way in sort of a live setting, I want to go through some skills that I have found helpful and see if I can tie those to editing tasks that you might do in your own work, both academic and professional. Even if none of you become professional editors, I suppose it takes all kinds of people. You will find it valuable to revise and edit your own material, and probably material from whatever organization or company or ministry or wherever it is that you end up working. Because if you can communicate clearly, that's going to be an advantage for both you and for the group that you represent. So the first key skill has to do with reading and interpretation. This is why so many English majors become editors. It's not just because there's no market for anything else, but it's because we spend most of our formal education thinking about how do I interpret what I've just read, often in literary terms, but also kind of how do you deal with rhetoric, how do you deal with argument. So the first question I have to ask whenever I'm editing something is, what is the main message here? And what is the author trying to do? Why is he or she putting things this way? And what's kind of the target method? This afternoon, for example, I edited a blog post. And this is the 35th, I think, blog post I've edited for this particular client. So I've got a good sense of his writing style and his goals. I know that he is writing primarily to a particular group of professionals, and that he tends to use a certain tone of voice and a certain approach to argument. And so I try to integrate those in the editorial choices that I make. The next question then is, who's listening? We've talked about audience quite a bit this quarter. So what does your audience already know about your topic, and what do they need to know? If you're writing to a relatively expert audience, then you don't have to rehash a whole lot of the basics or explain the entire situation. But if you are trying to inform them, so here's what's going on, and this is why you need to know this, and then I need your feedback or your ideas or something on this, maybe you need to build that up a little bit more. So this is as much about planning the document as it is about improving it at the end. This is why there's some skill and conceptual overlap sometimes between revision and editing. We've also talked about genre quite a bit this quarter, and editing fits right in here as well. The choices that you make and the kind of the elements that you target are going to differ depending on the genre that you're working in. I have colleagues who primarily edit poetry or fantasy fiction or government reports. And I could probably handle the government reports, but I do not mess with fiction because I am not a fiction writer and because I don't know enough about that craft to say in 2020, what is expected in a romance novel, what is expected in an action novel, what is expected in a young adult novel. Now in 1850, I might do okay, but nobody wants to know that anymore. My fault, in a PhD. Lastly, I need to think about where audiences might object. And this could be in terms of, this is going to make your argument weaker, or it could be in terms of, okay, this is going to just be flat out offensive, whether you mean it to be or not. I will often change or suggest different wording for a given audience or a given scene, because maybe the author didn't think of it this way, but I thought, you know what? If somebody interprets it this way, this could be really bad for the author. They could interpret that in a very negative light. Sometimes it's just a matter of knowing the setting and the audience. I remember I had a client ask me whether he should mention in his college application essay that he was descended from Chinese royalty. I'm not making that up. He actually asked this question. I don't know if he really was descended from Chinese royalty. And we had already done the bulk of the edits when he asked this, and I had to tell him, you know, this is not something that is really relevant to your case, the argument you're trying to make about your qualifications. And honestly, it's something that in this audience, in this country, might turn people off more than saying, oh, that's kind of cool. So this part often results in negotiations with the author. Ultimately, it's their book or paper or whatever. But it is my job to point out what is going on there, what might be helpful. Now, a lot of you work either full-time or part-time in ministry of some sort. And so you probably already run into rhetorical choices that somebody got upset about or somebody got offended by. Maybe they really, really didn't want to sing that song again, or they thought that this was a completely inappropriate way to title this message, or you shouldn't have used that, whatever it was. Part of learning an audience and a style is figuring out what actually needs to be changed and what could we maybe put a little more polish on so it works okay. Another useful skill here is, of course, style and mechanics, hence the manual of style. First thing I need to know as an editor is what sort of style guides and style sheets are in play. And this may also be an issue if you're working for a large organization, particularly national organizations, big companies. They tend to have style sheets, which are smaller internal documents that say, here's like how we capitalize and style our company name. Here's what we always capitalize. Here's how we spell this thing. Here's how we prefer to handle punctuation in this context. But they might also have a style guide. So if they are publishing a book, let's say it's a denomination publishing a theology book, they're probably going to go to Chicago style. And so those choices will reflect how you design the layout, how you structure the argument, how you cite the sources, all that fun stuff that you've had to learn in your papers already this quarter. You also want to think about how similar previous communications have been presented? How have they been organized? Many organizations, especially companies, have a certain corporate voice. Watch, for instance, a social media feed for a given company. There may be multiple people who actually run those sites, but they all try to kind of sound the same. You want to maybe express a certain tone. You want maybe to be everything be sort of fun and lighthearted, or you want everyone to be excited about this. A lot of churches will go that route, say, "Hey, this is good. We're going to be encouraged. We're going to make progress here." But maybe a political page might want to have a different tone. Maybe you want to be more urgent and say, "Hey, you have to care about this now, or the world's probably going to end yesterday," or whatever the argument is today. And so this goes back to knowing your context and knowing your audience, particularly when you come into a new role. If you're replacing someone or you just got promoted or something, it helps to know how things have been handled in previous documents. You might have opportunities to improve those, but there's a definite inertia going on. They want to do things the same way they have in the past 20 issues. Another element of style that's important is language or dialect. I live in Southern California. It's kind of taken for granted that a large segment of the population is either Spanish speaking or bilingual, English and Spanish. And so it makes sense that many companies will advertise in both languages, or they might decide based on the city or the neighborhood, we want to use majority English or majority Spanish. They may want to even use a particular style, a particular dialect of a language. I lived in Jackson, Mississippi, the deep South, for 8 years. And boy, did the ads pour on the Southern drawl real thick like, and you couldn't turn on the TV without hearing some idiot talk like, sometimes that's actually how they really talk, but they know how to reach their audience. You're making the same choices here. Sometimes you want things to be a little more formal, and so you keep everything high-level diction, formal tone, formal style, avoid the slang, all that stuff. Sometimes you want to go back and forth, called code switching. So there may be certain audiences that you always try to speak in one way to. If you are putting together a ministry update for the adult ministries, well, it makes sense to have it fairly formal and to assume that everyone can understand kind of standard English. So when you're an English-speaking congregation, all that stuff. If you're talking to the kids, you change a few things here and there. Hence the Gen Z devotional that's caused so much trouble we talked about earlier this quarter. The last thing under style mechanics that I would highlight is that we tend to have patterns of how we write, and that includes patterns of where we make mistakes. There are definitely sentence structures or types, or even some words where I just always have to think 3 or 4 times, is that how that's really spelled? I'm going to look it up. Doesn't matter how many times I've written it. Let's see, A-B-O-A, avocado, the guacamole fruit. I can spell guacamole more easily than I can spell avocado, apparently. And I've learned the same things about my clients. Sometimes they write in certain ways because that's how they learn to write English, or because that's how they prefer to structure their arguments. Excuse me. I found, for instance, that many of my clients who speak Korean or Chinese as a first language will write in similar ways to each other, partly because of what they learned, and partly because of sort of how their language circuits work in their brain. It depends on the first language you learn. Think, oh, okay, this is normal. So how does word order work in that language? How do definite articles or contractions or punctuation work in that language? That's going to make a difference in how you write in any other language. And then last skill I want to highlight is how does this fit in terms of improving communication and marketing? A lot of people with editorial training end up in communication departments, whether that is in marketing, kind of style marketing, advertising, that kind of stuff, or even just sort of the corporate communications and making sure that the messages that go out from a given organization are effective. And this is a good opportunity to apply your writing and editing skills in whatever role you end up serving. There's lots of need in most ministry contexts for good communication and good marketing. And yes, we can go back and forth about whether you should be marketing and which way and who you're trying to reach, and shouldn't you just wait for the Holy Spirit to help? But at some point, you got to talk to the people. So, a few questions you might ask there. If you're editing written documents, what kind of documents actually need that work? And there may be different genres in play here with different levels of editing. They're either expected or permitted. Maybe it's perfectly fine to clean up that email that's going out to the entire 1,000-person congregation. But the preacher gets really uptight if you edit his sermon notes, let alone the worship leaders in their slides. Oh, can't fix those typos. Another thing to consider is, are you talking directly to the authors, and when? Early in my editing career, I worked for several agencies, and typically the way the agencies would work is I would, the editors like me would sign up for a job, take an editing test, all that stuff. And the company would handle all of the client contact. So if you had a paper you wanted edited, you would upload it to their server, they'd give you a price quote, and then the editor would either be chosen or would volunteer to take that job. Volunteer in the sense of, I will do this one, not in the sense of I'm not going to do it, I'm going to do it for free. But you wouldn't actually have any back and forth with the client. And that was challenging in a lot of settings because, especially early on in my career, there were a lot of places where I was like, I'm not really sure how this genre is supposed to work, or what does this word mean, or is this a normal kind of thing to do in this sort of paper? In some cases, I'm able to go through entire documents without asking a single question. But in others, it really helps me to be able to email or sometimes even talk to my clients and say, hey, can I check in with you on this? I want to make sure that I understand this right. As I said before, even if you're not officially an editor in terms of your job description, you can often use those skills in some way to improve other people's documents, or at least to improve the stuff that comes out of your office. I actually had a student in one of my business writing classes back at Ohio State, and he was struggling a little bit because he wanted to improve his on-the-job writing, but he worked as a valet. He parked cars all day, and so there wasn't a lot of writing that could be done. And so I asked him, what's an area where you think the writing could be improved kind of in your company as a whole? And he said right away, the website. The website's terrible. It's just a mess, and no one can read it, and it's hurting our business. So, all right, why don't you see if you can take a couple of hours and fix the website instead of parking cars for a couple of hours. See what your boss thinks of that. And it worked out well for him because I knew he had the writing skills, but there just wasn't a lot of opportunity in there. Sometimes you have to look for these opportunities and show that those skills are part of that thing that you can do. If you are thinking along those lines to present your writing skills as part of your professional qualifications, you got to think about marketing it. And there's lots of resources out there about marketing, but it's an ongoing process. What do you know that could be relevant to this audience? What skills have you developed? What expertise do you have in maybe certain content? What experience can you bring to bear there? I use this phrase, pain points. All this means is, what problems are they having that maybe you can help fix? So I have an editing client who is a missionary, and he hired me, I don't know, a year or so ago now, to edit his ministry newsletter updates. He and his wife both served together on a university campus, and they keep busy. You know, they've got full-time jobs, and I think 4, maybe 5 children. So editing is not high on their priority list. And we've talked about, what kind of stuff do you need help with, and where can I kind of work with you on that? So the process is actually really similar to finding any sort of way to apply your skills in professional context. It's just a different skill set. All right, let's move on to proofreading then. I want to start by giving you some overall tips and techniques, and then we're going to go through some common grammar mistakes that I see on a lot of student papers, including the ones this quarter, and finish up with a little bit of a quiz to see how you did. So as you're proofreading your own work, this is something you want to do in paper 3 certainly, you got to be honest with yourself. Where are you generally weak in your writing? Maybe grammar and spelling always come naturally to you. Or maybe you worked really hard to learn all the grammar and spelling rules. Maybe you keep losing points on there versus there versus there, which is not very effective when I just say it. Imagine I just wrote it on the board. Maybe it's so easy for you to miss the comma splice or the sentence fragment. Comma splices are everywhere. Start there and pay more attention to that when you go through your editing and proofreading pass. Very useful technique here is to read the paper out loud and read it slowly. If you lose your breath while you're trying to finish a sentence, probably the sentence is too long. And if you stumble over a phrase, then maybe you should think, does that work? Is that too awkward? Because my reader's probably going to have the same issue. And of course, sometimes you leave words out or you write the wrong word down and you say, according to leading scholars, and you don't realize until the 3rd time through it, you didn't write according. If you've made revisions, pay close attention to that material, particularly, and this will probably be more applicable in a few years when you are writing in a professional context, but sometimes you write a lot of similar messages to similar audiences. One thing that I do this quarter for my UCR class is I have certain templates, because I have 300 students in the class, and they tend to ask the same types of questions. I usually get 5 or 10 emails at the start of the quarter about, can I add your class? And I get 5 or 10 about, I missed class. Did we do anything important? No, we never do anything important. And so I've learned that it's easiest just to keep a copy of that template on hand, stored in my email, and just pull it out as needed. But sometimes I'll customize it, and I have to be careful that I'm putting the right customizations in and not pulling stuff out that's not going to make sense for that audience, like using the wrong student's name or something embarrassing like that. We do want to be very careful about typos, homonyms, that's the there, punctuation, commas, everyone hates commas, and grammar. And that's why I have some of these resources coming up. You do, however, have an editor as your English professor. So if you're not sure about something, hey, come by office hours or send me an email and say, is this right? Google can be helpful, but I hate to break it to you, but sometimes people put wrong stuff on the internet. I have seen many typos repeated because somebody spelled it wrong one time and then it kind of gets passed on and on and on many documents down the line. It's sort of the Wikipedia problem. Something in Wikipedia is wrong, but you cite it anyway because, hey, look, it's a secondary source. Guess what happens? It doesn't help anything. So that is my overall approach to proofreading. And obviously different individuals and different documents will call for slightly different techniques, but I found it's a good starting point. To help you with that, I want to go over some common grammar mistakes. The first one is the dreaded comma splice and the related problem, the run-on. I guarantee you this will come up. It might, in fact, show up on a certain exam you might have coming up. Here's a good resource from the UNC Writing Center. You can review that for lots of rules and make your head swim with all the commas. But the basic idea is a comma splice is when you join independent clauses incorrectly. So an independent clause, we're back to third grade, this is a complete thought that could stand on its own in a sentence. If you need to join those two, you have some options. First option is to use the comma and the coordinating conjunction. So the acronym here is fanboys, for and nor, but or yet so. Do not fear, for I am with you. Notice the comma and the conjunction in bold there. The comma splice problem comes when you try to just shove those two together. Do not fear, comma, I am with you. Comma splice, that's the error. And the run-on sentence or the fused sentence has the same issue. Do not fear, I am with you, which actually means something completely different. So you want to make sure that those are in the right place. I do try to mark comma splices, but I'm not going to mark every one of them because that's all I would do. I wouldn't have any time to grade them the rest of your papers. So to fix it, you can add a conjunction, we saw earlier. You can change the comma to a semicolon, because semicolons are awesome. Or you can break the sentence up into two or more sentences. And sometimes I'll suggest one or more of those options when I go through a rough draft. Another common problem area is quotes and citations. And I fully appreciate that both APA and Chicago style can be a giant pain in the neck, especially Chicago style. Just a few things to keep in mind here. In US English, and it's the opposite of UK English, which is annoying, commas and periods always go inside closing quote marks. So if the sentence ends with just the quote, you don't have a citation or anything after that, then it's finish the sentence, put the period, and then the quote. Same thing with a comma. If you're using an in-text citation, in this quarter, that would be for APA style, then you're going to put that between the closing quote mark and the period. So here's our sentence, here's our citation, and here's our period. Just remember, this goes between it because this is part of your sentence, but not part of this sentence. If you're using Chicago, of course, you have footnotes. Those go at the end after the quote mark there. And of course, you put all the annoying Chicago details in that footnote. I don't have a specific resource on this one because we have like 300 websites already on quotes and citations. So that is actually where Zotero can come in really handy because it can generate citations for you as long as you give it the right information. Sentence fragments and agreements. This one tends to appear together. Again, we're going back to third grade. You need a complete sentence for ideally every single sentence of every single paper. A complete sentence has to include an independent clause, we just saw, a subject, and a verb. So study for your exam works. I need to go buy milk works. I wish I had chocolate cake works. But just chocolate cake or had chocolate cake, not so much. Here's a resource on tracking those down. I find that in some cases, sentence fragments show up in drafts because you hit the period key at the wrong point, usually by accident. Maybe you're going for the comma. And so Word says, oh, I'm going to start a new sentence. And that's generally a sentence fragment because you're stuck in the middle there. I also see a lot of errors in subject-verb agreements. Sometimes this is with the person in the grammatical sense and the verb, but you also have to agree with the number. So, two sample sentences here. Sunny, one person, sings 2 songs, but Sunny and Cher, 2 people, sing a duet. And you could potentially argue that in this case, Sunny and Cher is also the name of a band. It could be sings, but then I would say too bad, or something nicer than that. Here's a good resource on those from Guide to Grammar. Another agreement issue has to do with pronouns and antecedents. Antecedent is just a word the pronoun replaces. So we have here a male subject. So we have a masculine pronoun, female subject, feminine pronoun, and a plural subject, plural pronoun. There has been a lot of talk in the past several years about the singular they. I'm not going to get into all of that debate right now, but it may show up depending on the organization or company that you're writing for. This is where knowing the style sheet can be helpful. Okay, now, the best way to practice proofreading is to go do some combination of working on your own stuff and a classmate's. And I say that because if you work on your own stuff, you have an idea of what you actually meant. But on the other hand, it's easy to overlook what you thought you wrote. So easy to assume, oh, of course, that's what I mean. And so doing a peer review can be really helpful there. There are various proofreading exercises and grammar quizzes out there. The sites that I've linked you to have several of them. But I just want to do kind of a quick example to show you the kind of stuff you're looking for. So I want you to pause the video right now, and I want you to read through this passage, read through it a couple of times, and ask what errors can you find and how would you fix them. Shut up for a few seconds now to let you reach over and pause the video. And we're back. Did you find all the mistakes? Well, here's how I would edit this sample. I've highlighted the changes because PowerPoint does not have track changes. Some of these maybe you would handle differently. One question that's come up in recent years in editing circles is, do we capitalize internet? Because at first it was the internet. There was only one thing, and so everybody capitalizes the proper noun. But actually some major style guides, including Chicago, have now suggested it should be lowercase because it's basically everywhere. Of course it's the internet. And so you actually see 2 versions of that. I tend to lowercase it, but I wouldn't necessarily, if a client had it uppercase all the way through, I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, you're totally wrong. I'm going to have to change all of those unless they're specifically using a style guide that go against that. But a lot of the stuff is sneaky. For example, we have in the original, now people can communicate faster and more easily than ever before. And I bet you the first time you read that, you read it, communicate faster, more easily, because your brain will fill in the gap. And that's sort of the point of proofreading. It's really easy to write down the wrong word, especially if you're thinking of something else, or if you're not 100% sure which the right word is. One of my clients, I catch a lot of proofreading errors on his documents because he likes to mess with his sentences. And so sometimes he'll be in the middle of rewriting something or decide, oh, this is a better phrase, or I want to do it this way. And if we get to delete a couple of words that are from a previous version. So I'm not going to worry. Don't worry if you have different answers here, but if you completely miss some of these, maybe it's a sign you need to work a little bit more on that proofreading. Good news, everyone. You can use this writing workshop to work on your proofreading. So since we are very close to the end of the quarter, obviously your focus needs to be on your final assignments, paper 3 and the exam. Paper 3, as you know, is due Tuesday, this Tuesday, the 6th. If it happens not to be ready yet, definitely use this time to work on that. Ideally, you want to turn that in as soon as you can, because I will be grading those as soon as I can. If you've already got a draft on that, this is a good chance to practice those skills. Give yourself an hour, even if it's not that long a paper, and go through your draft. Line by line, word by word, letter by letter, and try to fix any mistakes that you see. You might want to swap a paper with a classmate. You might want to read it out loud. You might want to stand on your head and try to, no, don't do that. But whatever it takes to get you out of your own head and thinking, blah, 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 I've seen this, I already know what I'm saying here. This sentence is perfect, I don't really change. Okay, that's not how you spell that, but this is, otherwise the sentence is perfect. This is a good chance to work on that as well. And this will also help you with the self-review assignment, which is due first thing on October 8th. So you want to put that into your schedule the next day or so to make sure that is ready, and they'll also help you with the feedback exercise that we'll be doing in week 8. So keep fighting, keep writing. I didn't intend to make that rhyme. We're almost there, and we can certainly talk more about editing or proofreading in office hours, or to work through some of those skills on your own papers. You can do this. I'll see you next week.